Field and Stream magazine recently did an article about a man who they say is arguably the best deer hunter in the world, and his name is Hal Blood. Very well-known deer tracker from Maine. I was recently on his podcast, and his brand is Big Woods Bucks. So he's a podcaster, an author. He's got a couple of books all on tracking white-tailed deer in the snow. He's an outfitter. Big Woods Outfitters is his outfitter name. He also guides for black bear, for moose. He's been doing it for nearly 40 years. He was a lobsterman starting out, and it was his dream to be an outfitter, and him and his wife Deb, they found a way, they made it happen. But I was on his podcast, and he invited me to come out. And a lot of times I'll hear those things and I'll get different invitations, and sometimes I don't really necessarily believe them, and sometimes I don't necessarily want to go. But that was one where I wanted to go, and I pretty much believed him. But after a couple of weeks, I always kind of let things simmer. I don't want to push anybody into something that they maybe don't necessarily want to do. But a couple weeks went by, and then the podcast went live, and he mentioned it again. Hal did. And I said, if you're serious about that, I would love to do that. I don't know anything about tracking deer. We look at tracks around here, and always the blowhard type hunters like, oh, that's a big buck right there. But I don't really know. I wouldn't know the difference. So when I asked him, are you serious? He's like, absolutely, just come on out. And get this hunt scheduled. So it would have been last November. The second week, they basically hunt, I think it's 4 or 5 weeks, starting the first week in November. So we had the second week. So we were kind of really hoping for snow, because that's where it gets interesting. You're hunting the big woods, obviously, as he call it, Big Woods Bucks, Big Woods Outfitters. And Hal lives near Jackman, which is near the Canadian border. So far northwest Maine is where he's at. But having gone, at this point, I'd gone 2 years without guiding in Alaska. My body was just starting to heal. This was kind of really my first, I would say, physical test of any sort. Like Hal said, he goes, oh yeah, we could be hiking, 5 miles really easy, but don't be surprised if we're hiking 12 miles in a day. And I hadn't done anything like that. I'd been walking a lot, but I hadn't been, my body wasn't quite ready for a lot of physical exertion. So I've been hiking through the woods quite a bit, but as far as ducking around branches and all that kind of stuff, it was going to be a little bit of a test for me. So I was kind of nervous. And before I go any farther here, before I forget, I just want to mention this, that Onyx, actually on this hunt, they are a sponsor and a partner of Big Woods Bucks. And then when Hal told me to come out here, he said, you got to have Onyx. Do you have Onyx? And I said, no. And he said, well, all right, we'll get it for you. So Jared from Onyx called me and said, hey, we'll send you a thing, got an elite package. And he called me up after this hunt, and he asked me what I thought of it. And I said, man, it was awesome. I've got buddies that have Onyx, and if we're hanging stands or looking for pieces of land or who owns what, I'm always kind of bumming it off of them. And I'm not real tech savvy. I don't really enjoy that stuff, to be honest, and I'm kind of cheap as well. And so after I had it, and I realized, Hal uses it up there all the time. He's telling people where to go. He does some unguided hunts as well, and he'll just kind of give them a waypoint, hey, start here kind of a thing. So all of his guides, all of his hunters, they all have it. But it was invaluable up there. And Jared's like, hey, we've been watching your stuff a long time, and if you're interested, we would love to be the title sponsor of your Trust the Guide films. And I was kind of flabbergasted, because I've been trying to figure out, hey, how do I make these Trust the Guide films ad-free? How do I pay for them, for the production? Because production work's expensive. And they offered a a title sponsorship. Still not covering all the expense to these films, but a good portion of it. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Onyx, and also to extend an invitation to anybody who wants to renew their subscription or subscribe and sign up for Onyx. You can use the code MDMM, Modern Day Mountain Man, just the acronym MDMM, and get 20% off your purchase through Onyx. So huge blessing to trust the guide, Modern Day Mountain Man, to be working with Onyx. But anyways, so just that feeling of going to Maine was, I know the woods aren't as big as Alaska, and I kind of knew, like, okay, I mean, I'll be able to get by, but it was something different, and it was a challenge coming again physically. And I realized how much I had missed that. Stepping into a circumstance where I'm not confident that I can do it, something comes alive in you when that happens. And I love that. That's like gives you a sense of adventure. I'm excited to announce our latest Billy Molls hosted adventure. Join me for an unforgettable week of fishing adventure and Christian fellowship. This trip is conducted by fellow brothers in Christ and owners of Rainbow River Lodge, one of the premier fly-out fishing outfitters in all of Alaska. We'll be targeting giant rainbow trout, king salmon, chum salmon, Arctic char, grayling, northern pike, and lake trout. The scenery is pristine, the fishing is world-class, the food and accommodations are top-notch. Cost is $11,700 per person, only 10 slots available. So bring your family, bring your buddies, or come solo. And I look forward to sharing a fishing hole and a campfire with you. So I get to Maine, fly into Boston. Boston's a crazy city. Man, road rage stuff going on there like I've never seen before. But drive up to Hal's place, and Hal's not there when I pull in, and I meet his wife, Deb. And Deb just gives me a big hug, and she just said, "Oh, you're an answer to prayer." And she goes on to explain to me how Hal was unsaved until just like a year or two before this hunt. He'd just gotten baptized, and Hal and I had talked a little bit about that, but Hal's kind of old school. He's kind of quiet, real low-key, easygoing, gentle guy, nice guy, so easygoing. And so he mentioned, he's like, "Yeah, watch all your Trust the Guide videos, I really like them." And Deb just mentioned how she'd been praying for Hal for years, and she went to church, studied the Bible, but Hal wouldn't go to church with her. And she came home a few different Sundays and found Hal watching some of my videos, some Trust the Guide videos. And she just said, the Lord really used you in your ministry, I feel, to witness to Hal, because you're someone that he respects and can relate to, and to see you sharing your faith, I believe, really helped Hal in his walk. And I kind of figured that was going on. The fact that Hal invited me, I don't know why, I just kind of had a sense that had a big part to do with it. I got the impression that Hal probably doesn't kick invites to a lot of people on a whim like that. And so that kind of made sense as to how all this was coming together. But the country there in Maine was about the way I expected it would be. Big, borderline mountains, big timber, swampy, a lot of swampy country. They call it boreal. And so it's kind of tundra-esque, like spongy. And Hal explained this to me because he's tracked deer up in Ontario, northern Minnesota, and I think even a little bit in Wisconsin. And when he said the first time he was up in Ontario, he didn't take a buck track for like the first 3 days because he was expecting the big feet up in Ontario like what they have in Maine. And he said, no, it's a different subspecies. The deer in Maine, the bucks particularly, the bucks, their feet will get quite a bit bigger than the does. And he said that's not nearly, there's not so much discrepancy between the does and the bucks here in the northern Midwest as there is over in Maine. And I did find that to be true. It is a little easier. Hal has like a cheat sheet kind of a thing for rookies like me that kind of tell you the measurements and what to look for. I think they sell them on their website, in fact. But so it was a lot easier than I expected to differentiate, but to not get ahead of myself. So there's a lot of rivers, there's big swamps, but it's all kind of, I would call them rolling hills. But some of these hills, you're talking several hundred feet, some of them over 1,000 feet for sure. As far as base of the mountain to the top, it's big country. It's wild country. I think it's a lot of paper mill country. So a lot of big tracts of basically public land. So it was about like I expected. First couple of days, Hal and I kind of bummed around together. He had me just still hunting. We didn't have any snow the first 2 days, so he kind of showed me what still hunting and what to look for. And he sent me a couple copies of his book, and he had sent them to me months before, and I'd read them, but I found it hard to really understand what he was saying. But until you got there, then it made sense. And then when I came home, then I read the books, and then it made a lot more sense. You almost kind of have to be there and experience that woods and what you're looking for. There's no cornfields and stuff like that I'm used to in that country, so it was different. So then the third and fourth day we got snow. Actually, the second day we got snow. One of the other guides said, hey, up on this mountain there's snow up there. So that's where Hal and I went. And he guided me the first day, and as we're going in through those tracks, and he's like, oh, he'd call it an either or. He said at a 3.5 years old, typically the bucks may get to 200 pounds. You can just kind of tell by the size. At about 4.5, you can gauge by the size of the track. But then once they're 4, and he can just tell by looking at the track how big they are. And they're shooting the bucks for weight, not really racks. You'll get some nice rack bucks, but like a 160 is a real giant, very, very rare. And you get I noticed there's a lot of, I would say, semi-deformed type racks. You'll get 4.5-year-old 6-pointers, a lot of that kind of stuff. So they're more focused on, you want to get a 200-pounder. That's a trophy, kind of no matter what the rack. And in large part, when you're tracking them, you don't have much time to size them up. You kind of just got to shoot. So we're going along, and we find this track of about, Hal figures is an either or. And his buck was dogging some does. And a while later, we cut a bigger track. And then that led us way up and around for miles. We ended up putting on 10 miles that day. Then Hal was like, we should catch this buck. And we had different interactions with some does. And then, so we left the track of the first buck, followed the second buck, and then the second buck kind of loops back around into this drainage bottom where we had started. And it ended up crossing another track. And Hal's like, I think this is the first buck we were on this morning. And he said, there's some does in here. My guess is there's a hot doe in here, a lot of tracks. And he said, these two bucks are in here together. Let me sort this out. And it was amazing how he could sort that out. And what he said, what I learned was interesting, is in this country, part of the reason why it's good for tracking is there isn't so many deer. I mean, there's more deer than probably what I would have expected. When you look at the woods, it's holding more deer than I would expect. So it's a perfect number of deer in that you go for a walk, you're going to cut a buck track if you have fresh snow. But also, you're not going to have too many deer where it's next to impossible to sort out the buck that you're after. And that I found kind of interesting. That's not something that I thought of, nor did I expect. And so as we're going along, and Hal's like, all right, keep an eye out, because I think these deer are pretty close. He said, I'll get this sorted out. And he's pointing things out to me, but largely I'm kind of hunting. I'm kind of behind the gun. I'm kind of more like a client. And I asked Hal before I came, I'm like, how far is the farthest shot that, what are your typical distance? He said, the longest I've ever shot in all my years is 100 yards. And Hal's a big believer in a peep sight. So I had my grandpa's Savage 99, model 99. It was a 303 Savage. So his gun's 100 years old. It has just a buckhorn sight. So I figured, well, I'll try that. I shot it at home, shot it at 50 yards, shot it pretty good. It was about an inch high at 50 yards. I figured, man, that's perfect. I didn't shoot it a bunch. Well, as we're sneaking along, we come to this clear cut, and Hal said, yeah, you rarely see the deer out in these wide open clears, a fresh clear cut like that. And as he's making sense of the tracks, all of a sudden a deer jumps up, and I see that it's a doe, and then all of a sudden I see another deer, so I pull my gun up and another deer jumps up, and this thing's got a rack. I don't know how big. It didn't strike me as being huge, but it at least a 2.5, probably a 3-year-old buck. I think it was just like what Hal said, probably an either or type buck, 3.5-year-old. Well, it runs out and there's a tree alongside of me, so I figure I'd get a rest. And I remember Hal had told me earlier, he said, with this snow, he said, the conditions are perfect. He said, if you draw blood on a buck, we will find him. I mean, he said that with absolute certainty. So the buck, I whistled or grunted, and it stopped. And I was guessing it at 150 yards. And so I kind of held high in my front. I knew it was at least 150. Let's put it that way. I was hoping that it was that far. And my front bead was basically covering the buck's shoulder. And so I touched one off, and I heard no report, and he was gone. He went right over a ridge, gone. I was 95% sure that I missed. Well, just then, another buck, and this one was huge. I mean, the shoulders, the neck, he was dark-bodied, and again, didn't get the impression it was some booner or something, but a sizable rack for sure. Jumps out. He was about 70 yards, got up from behind some spruce, and then he stopped at somewhere between 80 and 100 yards. And again, so I was on that tree, I was reloaded, and I'm like, my mind's going a million miles an hour. And Hal goes, shoot. And I just hesitated, and I said, what if I hit the first one? And then Hal kind of went silent. I think he kind of realized, again, we were both 99% sure we didn't hit it, but the thought is like, what if I hit that thing and it jumped over the next? You hear about those stories, right? They don't happen to me too often. But what if I dumped this thing and it was just perfect? I mean, I'm just sitting there and the thing's right on his chest. It was perfect. And I just let him run away. And then Hal's like, oh man, yeah, I guess I didn't think. He goes, I think you missed. And I said, I think I did too, but how would that have looked if Hal Blood, potentially the greatest deer hunter in America, invites me to come out hunting with him, and then I shoot 2 bucks right in front of him and he's got to tag one, and I don't even think that's legal in Maine. But then we're sitting there just like, man, that was cool. It was amazing because Hal knew exactly what he was doing. Everything that he had said was exactly the way it was. We had the either or buck and then the for sure big buck, and then he's like, well, why didn't I shoot? Hal had his rifle with him the whole time, but he was kind of in film mode. Hal films his hunts. You can watch the Big Woods Buck channel. He's got a lot of filming as well. So he didn't film it, nor did he pull up his gun to shoot, so we kind of just laughed about it, But then on the way home that night, it was getting on dark. We went up and looked, and I did miss that first buck. And Hal's like, yeah, he said, I think that was over 200 yards. He goes, that was kind of just a shot in the dark. And I said, yeah. He said, yeah, you maybe should have been aiming, up above him even. It was a long poke, and no blood, no nothing. We looked for a long time, and long story short, the next day, we tracked again, went back to that same country, got on a big track, a really big track this time, and never did catch up to that. And Hal let me take that track, and he just followed behind. But having him to point things out and for me to ask questions, because he said, hey, the best way to learn is by doing. He said, you could follow me along, but ultimately, as you know, you're going to figure it out by doing. So why don't you just go ahead and you lead? And he said, I can tell, you've got good woodsmanship. He kept telling me how I need to walk on my toes more, and I tried to explain. I'm like, man, like with my back, that's one thing that I've kind of lost. I kind of walk on my heels now, and I'm starting to get that back a little bit, so I can't walk very quietly anymore. Like Hal's like, actually I think he is part Indian, he just walks on his toes, man. He's 68 or 69 years old, in very, very good shape. I mean, he walks in the woods, he's 6'2", 6'3", very lean, and that dude's like a freaking ninja in the woods. So we spend that whole second day tracking, and we cut 2 different tracks. One was a giant, but Hal said it was too old and it was headed the wrong way. He said we were just too far behind it and to really follow it. But we were on a good buck and couldn't catch up to him. Then he said, hey, tomorrow's the final exam. He said, I'll go with you one more day. But he said, after that, he goes, you're ready. That's just the way it is. And I'm amazed, like, you're fairly loud, but those deer don't see humans all that much, so they're not as flighty as our deer in the Midwest. So again, it was another thing that I'm like, how in the heck could you get up close to a buck with a cameraman with 2 people? But I don't know, they like to make visual confirmation with what you are oftentimes. So, and guys do it, and it's a really, really fun way to hunt. Well, on that third day, then we got a bunch of rain, and it melted the snow. So I never really got my final exam. Or actually, what the deal was is he was just going to turn me loose. That was the thing. He was going to turn me loose and let me track just by myself. And he said that was the final exam. But had I not had Hal there those first 2 days, and to shadow him with his certainty is like, oh yeah, this track is between 2 and 4 hours old. This is, and here's why. You see this is where he stopped to eat, is like, okay, you watch the poop, the droppings, okay, he's getting ready to bed. I think he's gonna get ready to bed. You see he's slowing his pace here, he's eating more. Like all these things that he knew to be fact, like I could read them in a book and I wouldn't really know what was what. But to have him there and explain this is how it is and this is why, and then all those things that he said, they played out, that cut my learning curve down by probably 2 or 3 years of deer tracking. So it was invaluable to have a mentor there. So the final days, it was just dry ground, did some still hunting, some sitting, saw a few deer. I don't think I saw another buck, kind of sat on scrapes, did a little bit of calling, and that's kind of tough hunting. And but I loved it. I think it's like the Alaska of deer hunting, just big country. The camp camaraderie was a blast. I'm actually planning on going back up there to film a documentary about Hal and Deb, Big Woods bucks, this November. Gonna bring Jeremiah along, my editor, producer. He'll do some filming. So that's the plan, is to do a story about Big Woods bucks, and who knows what all that'll be. But what I found interesting is that I feel like Hal perhaps does more for conservation than most conservation organizations. And he does it by, he shares all of his, he has no secrets. Everything he knows, he shares in his books, in his videos. He has no secrets. He just says, hey, I want other people just to become better deer hunters. And so thus is he's helping other deer hunters be successful. And then the tradition of deer camp is very much alive and well over there. It reminds me of what it was like here in Wisconsin when I was a kid. And so as long as people are hunting and loving that camaraderie and people are doing it, conservation is going to happen by default. And I found that quite interesting, how in like the secular world, like everybody wants to keep their secrets, and because they want to be the best, they want to be successful and hide what they know so that they stand out. Where Hal, that's not his objective. He wants everybody to do better, and then he's just a conduit. And that's what we're called to do as Christ followers, is just be a conduit for Christ, is to share the good news. And we were the one night we were hanging out with, I was hanging out with Deb, his wife, and Hal, and Hal was talking about, yeah, I go do these sports shows and give these seminars, and people, they come up and they ask the same questions over and over and over again. And, he goes, I can tell that they want to know. They want information from me. And I tell them, well, yeah, did you read the book? And they'll say, oh, yeah. And he's like, well, but I know they haven't read the book. He goes, I'm happy to give people information, but if they bought the book, that would cut down on 90% of the questions that they're asking me. And he said, I can just tell by their questions that they hadn't read the book, because they're just so basic. And then Deb goes, kind of like how I've been telling you to read the book, Hal. Referring to the Bible. Oh, it was Sunday morning, we were going to church together before I left on the last day. And Hal was like, he was convicted. And he didn't have much, he just kind of like, yeah, he knew that he was caught. And to be honest, I would say that probably, I've been really diligent Bible reader, probably 6 days a week for years. But this past fall, or about during that time, and on that hunt, we were hunting late, and I read right in the morning. I have coffee and read the Bible for about an hour every morning. And I would say for about 40, maybe 50 days before that hunt, I had really slacked. It was hunting season and was kind of busy doing a lot of things. I had a bunch of speaking engagements, and I had really slacked off. And you know what? Like I was feeling it. I could feel a difference. I wasn't as close to the Lord with me. But I just thought that was pretty powerful. And we have to walk in truth. We've got, just like Hal said, we take the final exam. We've got to go live it out and do it ourselves. That's how we really learn. But we also need to refer back to that manual, to the book, to make sure that we're doing it right. And as we're walking in truth and we're having conversations with people, that's usually what we would refer them to. Matter of fact, my mom was just asking me this. She's like, well, what does that mean to walk in truth? Because you walk in faith, that means you have faith that God's going to do something. But if we have faith in God and we're reading the book, we know that to kill a big buck, we got to get out of the truck and we got to put effort and we've got to exercise, put on the miles and do the things. That's what we're called to do as Christians, is to go out there and walk in truth, do the things that we know to do what the book says, do what we've learned along the way, and then as we go along, we're going to learn those subtle nuances to the task, whatever it is, to hunting or to going and making disciples. It's a constant process, and we have to be in the book. We have to be reading the book. And if we're not reading the book, when we go up to the experts, in the case of hunting, when those people that aren't reading the book come up to Hal, they spot it immediately. Same thing as we're having problems in our marriage or in work or whatever, any avenue of life, and we're having problems, you go up to someone who knows the book, they're going to spot it immediately by what you're saying. Because if you're not speaking truth about whatever your circumstance is, it shows you that you're disconnected from the Holy Spirit, you're disconnected from the Word of God. And I think we all need a mentor. We need somebody that knows that book. In Hal's case, having a mentor in the hunting realm who wrote the book was pretty dang valuable to me, right? And so we need a mentor who's spiritually a couple levels above us. If we're a white belt, we need a mentor who's a brown belt. And if we're a white belt, we should be mentoring somebody who's thinking about taking karate class. I think we should all, it's funny, that's something that I've been saying for, I don't know, last like 2-3 months. I keep saying, like, I think everybody should be mentoring someone and being mentored by someone. And then I got confirmation at the church where I go here just a couple of weeks ago. The pastor said the exact same thing. So find somebody to mentor, because as you're mentoring someone, you're going to learn how to communicate with people. And being mentored by people, you learn how to speak truth, to walk in truth yourself, and for somebody to hold you accountable. Accountability, man, that's, I got to do a video just on accountability. That, I think that in our world, that is a big thing. Nobody likes to be held accountable. It's easy to be online, not be held accountable. But anyways, that would be my encouragement, to get in the book, read that book. Don't rely on your pastor, your wife, your husband, your mom, your dad, your children. Anybody is like, we are to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. Get in the book and follow Christ. That is the greatest adventure any of us will ever know. So I'm excited for this Billy Molls channel. That's part of the reason why I haven't done many Trust the Guide videos in quite some time, is we recognized that it was hurting the algorithm on the Modern Day Mountain Man and Trust the Guide films. So the Trust the Guide films are going to be on the Modern Day Mountain Man channel. The Modern Day Mountain Man channel will be all the Alaska hunting films and hunting films in general, and then like different hunting content, how-to on hunting. So the Billy Molls channel will be these Trust the Guide videos, Blaze Your Trail videos. The Blaze Your Trail, what I really kind of realize this is a discipleship, mentorship type of channel. So this, what we're watching here, is a Trust the Guide video. Yeah, I'm really excited for that. And also excited, we've got a Trust the Guide, Billy Molls hosted fishing adventure in Alaska 2026, June 27th through July 3rd. We're going to be on a salmon, rainbow trout. We'll be fishing grayling, pike, maybe some lake trout, Arctic char. We'll be fishing in western Alaska with Rainbow River Lodge. So we've got 12 slots available. Cost is $11,700. Premier fishing lodge in Alaska. We're flying out every day, weather permitting. Gonna do some adventuring. Part of the plan is to go see Dick Prenicke's cabin at Twin Lakes, go see some glaciers, maybe some hiking, have some fellowship, some devotionals by campfire. I think the last one we did in Alaska last year was a great time. This one I think is going to be great as well. So you can find that on our website, BillyMollsAdventures.com. Building a new website, by the way. Or you can go to the link in the description. You'll find us there. But again, shout out to Onyx for supporting Trust the Guide. Appreciate you supporting them. If you want to, please share this video, like, comment, and we'll try to build this channel up. And yeah, I'm excited for it. And for those of you who have offered support, I did close out the 501c3. I just want to be a tent maker. I don't want to go through the accounting and the blah, blah, blah. I just want to keep it simple. So for those of you that have donated financially, thank you very much. And many of you continue to do so. I appreciate that. Our P.O. box is in the description if you want to support us financially. Really appreciate it. And if you want to buy some t-shirts, merch, whatever at the website, that's always appreciated. But just your shares, your subscriptions to the new channel, greatly appreciated. And definitely your prayers. So God bless you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.